going to talk about eGrants enrollment, and then member timekeeping. So these aren't so much focused on gathering forms, copies, we're really talking about like a process and an ongoing activity that you're going to be doing as you're administering this grant. So those are the two topics that David and I will introduce you to. I want to do a fast facts of eGrants just to ground us before we move forward. First thing to know, this is a web-based grant management system. So you see up on the screen, I've got this egrants.cns.gov. So that's where you're going to go to access eGrants. But what you're going to use it for is not just general grant management. You're going to use it very specifically for member management purposes. You're enrolling members, suspending or reinstating them. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And then exiting them in eGrants. Again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Next thing to know, it's administered by CNCS. That's our funder, the Corporation for National Community Service. And as I mentioned, they have a dedicated help desk. So while you're portfolio manager, we can provide training, we can provide guidance. Sometimes there's going to be technical issues, and we have to go to CNCS for that. And I think the more you do this work, you'll figure out the right time to go to them versus us. eGrants can be seen, all the information there, by multiple people. So you, the subgrantee, you're going to enter in the information, but the staff at Youth Build USA, we're the prime grantee. We can also see that. And then finally, CNCS. So this is the official record, and it's seen by all the different parties. And then finally, I want you to know that eGrants is linked to another website called My AmeriCorps. And this is a website that members use. So they're applying for AmeriCorps, they're filling out forms, and eventually it's where they're going to access their education award. And one more thing, this comes up a lot, so I just want to go ahead and say it, even if it seems obvious. DYB and eGrants are not linked in any way. The reality is you're probably going to be putting in the same information multiple places, and that can be an annoyance, absolutely. But there isn't a way for these sites to be linked. So that's just something that's going to come up. And if you're fortunate enough to have that DOL grant, you've also got MIS. So just acknowledging you're putting in that information over and over, but it isn't possible for those to talk to each other, unfortunately. We are using this wonderful technology, and because I have the option to do it, I actually want to pull up eGrants real quick. I thought it would be helpful for those who've never been in eGrants to kind of see how the site works. Because I want to protect member privacy, we're not actually going to go through and enroll or invite, do any of that kind of stuff, but we'll just take a look at how the site works. So we're online at egrants.cns.gov. I've got my username and password in there. If you don't have one, we love to set that up for you. You just need to contact your portfolio manager. We'll work through that with you. You might have noticed there's this don't have an eGrants account. And you might think, I don't want to bother my portfolio manager. I'll just do this myself. They're busy. Please don't do that. Please reach out to us. We want to help set it up. If you go through this link, we're not going to have you connected to where you need to be. So definitely reach out to us and we'll get you set up with an account. So I've got my credentials in. I'm going to click log into eGrants, and it's going to bring us to this page. There's some extra stuff you're not going to see. What you're looking for is Portal Home. So this is the button you're going to click on, and it's going to take you into eGrants in just a second. You'll see that you're able to navigate through eGrants and all the different sections on this left-hand side. This is our navigation bar. And it's always going to start you off at the S&N work basket. I know we have some experienced folks, so if you wouldn't mind in the chat, anyone know what S and N in S&N work basket stands for? State and national. So that's the type of grant that we have. And this is where you're going to do most of your work. Makes sense, right? You can see, we've got things like pending applications and invitations. We've got exits. When you go into your account, you're going to see only the members associated with you. I have access to all of them, so this is a pretty long list, but it'll be restricted to what your grant is, and you'll be able to click on these hyperlinks to the members and go in and do the work that you need to do. Next thing to point out quickly, S&N reports. You may have a supervisor or your board you want to update on what's going on with your AmeriCorps program. You're putting all this data in here, and great thing is you can get it back out. I can point you toward, if you need it, a snippet or a short video where we go through how to download and do these reports. So that's a resource for later, but just want you to know that we have an opportunity to get the data back out. Just really quickly, just the other probably sections you'll end up using is the invite members. David's about to talk to you about this. That's what it looks like. And then finally, manage members. You're able to search by name for the individual member, submit, go to their homepage, and again, find the information you need, make any updates. So I'm gonna stop there and return to our presentation. And I hope that that was helpful, again, just giving you kind of a little bit of a baseline, bit of knowledge about how eGrants works. And now we'll build on that and talk about the specific things that you need to be doing in order to enroll a member into AmeriCorps.
Matt and LT introduced you guys to this flowchart, and I just want to highlight kind of where we are in the process. So we've made it through the application eligibility, CHC checks, contracts, and now we're going to talk through pre-enrollment in eGrants and enrollment in eGrants. So let's start diving into it. So here is kind of the general process that we have with eGrants. So we're going to go through this, and we're not going to go into huge detail. So this is why we have this kind of piece around resources being available. So if you haven't been to our YouTube channel, we're definitely going to kind of get you links throughout this conference and into post-conference of some of the materials that we've already created. And one of them really walks through step-by-step how to enroll people in eGrants. So for this session, what we're really going to do is just kind of give you this overview of the process and these basic steps from inviting the member all the way to completion. So we're going to be returning to this flowchart throughout our discussion. So the first step in this process is inviting the member. So as Lauren just showed you, you can access this in eGrants. You fill out information. You need to have their names, the social security number, and importantly, they need to have an email address. So this is something you're going to need to collect before you can complete this step. Once you invite the member, this will show up in whatever email account you sent to. Now, because it is automated through the eGrant system, it can often be seen as spam or junk mail, so check those folders. Then they will have an opportunity to click on a link in that email, and that will actually take them to the kind of sister site to eGrants of My AmeriCorps. So the member will fill out their portion of the enrollment form. And we encourage you guys to find a way to be there with your members while they fill it out, because there can be some confusing information as they go through this process. But it's important that the member it completes this portion and fills out their information to the best of their ability to get through the next step. All right, so we've invited the member accepted the invite in their email, they filled out their enrollment form, and this is where we get into something a little bit complicated. So I'm going to slow down a bit and get a little more detail into this. So we're going to go through a process of citizenship verification. So the way this works in the system is after the member completes their portion of the enrollment form, so that third step, it's going to trigger a process in the system to automatically run their social security number against the database that the Social Security Administration has on file. And then one of two things is going to happen. Either that number is going to be verified by the system, in which case it'll usually take somewhere around 24 to 48 hours. And that's great. That most of the members, that's what's going to happen. Actually, the data that we got from CNCS is about 96% of members. That's the process. So you go through citizenship is verified, then you move on to completing the enrollment in eGrants, which we'll get to in a minute. And now in those 4% of cases where this doesn't happen, you should get an email from CNCS or whoever is registered as the main point of contact for your eGrants system. And if you have a question about who that point of contact is, please contact your portfolio manager and we can let you know who the main point of contact in eGrants for your program is. But they should get an email stating that the citizenship isn't verified. And then that's when you go through a process where you need to take those eligibility documents that you secured during the enrollment process and were discussed on the pre-homework video, and you're going to send those to CNCS at the National Service Trust. They will review them and then manually verify it. So what does this kind of look like in the system? So here's an example of a member where their citizenship, their social security and citizenship status is pending. And here's an example of, if you look towards the bottom here, of where their social security status was verified, but their citizenship status is returned. So that's a situation where you would need to go in and send that information to CNCS. And when you're doing this for the first time, we encourage you to reach out to us to help you walk you through the process. But once you kind of do it a few times, it's pretty easy to kind of navigate. And here's an example of what happens sort of after that information is sent in. So you send in the information, CNCS reviews it, and they would manually verify it with a date. Now, these dates are really important because you can't enroll the member until both their citizenship and their social security status and their citizenship has been verified. So you want to get this done as soon as possible. So that means making sure the member is completing their portion of the enrollment form as soon as possible. And if you have anybody who triggers a pending status, or sorry, not a pending status, but a cannot be verified status, then you want to get on getting those documents in as soon as possible. So great. So we've got through that piece. So we've managed to get the citizenship and social security number verified. And now we can complete the last portion of enrollment. And until this is done, the member is not officially in AmeriCorps. So this eGrants enrollment is very important. So let's kind of talk through the different pieces that need to be in place. So we just talked through citizenship and social security status. That date is important. You can't do it before that date. The next piece, the criminal history checks. So Matt and LT walked through the process for the criminal history checks. Now, the way it works in eGrants is you go in and you check these boxes, and if you see the date here, that's the verification date of whenever you check this box. So you cannot enter in a custom date. It's whenever you go in the system. So we would encourage you, as soon as you complete those criminal history checks, check the box, go to save information, and then if you need to, you can come back and complete the enrollment later, but it will save this date for you. So whenever you go in and check that box, that's the date it's going to record, and you can't enroll a member before that date. So speaking of the start date, once you have all this information and you know when the member is going to start, you'll put it in there, you'll select your program, the slot type, you'll click on that you have verified all this information, and then this will light up and you will be able to officially enroll the member. And once you click that button, they're officially in eGrants and they're officially an AmeriCorps member. So that's exciting. The thing that you want to do though is double check everything before you click this button, because it's a lot easier to fix things before you click this button than afterwards. So if there's a problem with the criminal history checks or other documentation, it's much harder to fix it after you enroll the member as opposed to before. So if this is your first time enrolling members, we do have a process to have you guys talk to us, and we'll review those files before you put them into eGrants to make sure that everything's in place where it needs to be. What exactly is an AmeriCorps start date? So the first piece we want to talk about, first day, the AmeriCorps member, it will start earning hours and is eligible to earn hours. So that's really kind of the baseline of what it is for us, is when they're in the eGrant system and they're eligible to earn hours. And importantly, it doesn't have to be the same for every member. So if you say, for example, in the current times, you're having issues collecting somebody's ID and you have to delay that member's enrollment, they may not have the same start date as the rest of your cohort, and that's okay. So it doesn't have to be the same for every member. It also doesn't need to correspond to your youth build start date. You could start your youth build program at a certain time and decide, you know what, we're not going to enroll anybody in AmeriCorps until after we do mental toughness or after we go through these other pieces. So they don't need to exactly line up with when the member started at your program. And importantly, it is the date that's entered into eGrants, and it's on their paperwork, specifically the member service agreement. It's very important that that start date is correct on their member service agreement, because that is a legally binding contract, and you're telling them this is when you started being an AmeriCorps member. So if you do run into any issues enrolling a member and you have to change this date, you should go back and you can strike through that date, and you can initial next to a correction and have the member initial next to the correction as well if you need to correct that start date. And if, again, you run into that situation and you need additional guidance, please reach out to us, and we're happy to talk you through it. So let's talk about another piece of this enrollment is the system only gives you 8 days to go back and enroll somebody. So on this calendar here, we have this example of if your member, you're trying to set the start date is August 17th, 2020. You're trying to go right out the gate and get members enrolled in the next grant year. That means that the enroll member button is only going to be available until August 24th for that start date. So if that's the start date you want, you need to enroll them in eGrants on or before August 24th. Now, let's go to another example. Say for whatever reason you had a lot of stuff going on and you didn't get around to it on the 24th, and next time you go back into eGrants, it's now the 27th. Well, you can only go back those 8 days. So the earliest that member could start would be August 20th. Even though they have all their paperwork done, even though their citizenship is verified, even though they may have signed the contract with the date of the 17th, you cannot enroll them for the 17th. You would have to use at the earliest the 20th. So it's really important that when you guys complete this process, you're aware of this 8-day window and you make sure that you get everything done in eGrants and them officially enrolled in the system to make sure you give them the start date that you want for them. So again, this is just kind of a summary of the things you need to do before and once this kind of 8-day window pops up. So on or before, make sure you're getting all the eligibility paperwork and the contract done. You're getting the citizenship, Social Security verification. You're getting those CHC checks done. And then you have your 8-day window to enroll the member. So in summary, here's again our process. Invite the member. The member is going to accept the invitation. They're going to complete their portion of the enrollment form. Then the citizenship is going to be verified. And then the program is going to go back and complete their portion of the enrollment form. And then the member is in eGrants. And once again, just a reminder, we do have a video of this in a step-by-step process, and we're going to send that to you guys so you have that available, especially the first time that you're doing an eGrants enrollment.
So we're back at our flow chart. We've gone ahead and we've talked about the enrollment process. You're seeing that it kind of wraps around our start date because we do some things before they start and we have up to 8 days to complete it. But the thing that sits right next to this start date box is our AmeriCorps member hour logs. And the reason for that is from the very first day of service to their very last, we have to document the hours that they're earning toward their AmeriCorps Education Award. And the member hour log is the tool that we use to track that. But before we talk about the log itself, we want to talk about timekeeping as a general concept. We want to make sure that we're all crystal clear on what is acceptable under this grant to be counted and what isn't. And the way we like to talk about it is this concept of youth build time versus a maritime. So you're seeing I have this smaller circle of a maritime sitting within our larger, essentially youth build program. It's a subsection of that. And that's because our funder, CNCS, essentially sees our members as part-time. Most of us have quarter-time members, so only spending part of their day on AmeriCorps is kind of how our funder sees it. So we're going to come back to this. Again, goal is for everyone to feel really comfortable with this concept by the end of this training. But again, AmeriCorps, it's fine that it's only part of their time. There's a lot of things that we do at Youth Build that are wonderful and important, and they can fit around the edges of our AmeriCorps hours that we're tracking on that member hour log. So what do we get to count? There's 3 main buckets. And the first is service, right? AmeriCorps, we're all about service. And LT mentioned this on our position descriptions. Every member is going to have a primary service activity, and it's part of their contract. For most members, it's construction, but there are others. And when you think about primary service, it's what the member would say if someone asked them. So what did you do for your AmeriCorps service? And they'd say, I built affordable housing. Or if they're a digital divide member, they'd say, I refurbished computers and I provided digital literacy training for seniors, something like that. And that's what the vast majority of their time is going to be spent on for their AmeriCorps service. But we also have something we call secondary service or other service projects that round out and make that AmeriCorps experience more meaningful. So maybe once a month you have a partner, then you go to the food bank and your members are involved in that different type of service. We've actually done a study and we found that these secondary service projects are extremely meaningful to young people. It's a way for them to explore different career paths, they meet new people, they're building social capital. So in addition to their primary service, we want you to be doing these other things and adding that in. There's a third type of service you're seeing there, outside member service. Think of that as like a service internship. Not doing it with all of your members, but it's special to them. If you want to do that, talk to your portfolio manager and we'll figure out the right way to document it, the right way to supervise it, and make sure that it's allowable. So there's no limitations on service. We talked about earlier, for a quarter time member, you're trying to get to 450 hours. All of those could be service, not a problem at all. So no limit on that. But we have another category, which we call training. We do a lot of training in Youth Build. That includes our GED, high school diploma, classroom time, leadership development, our vocational training. All of that fits in this category. But there's a limit. AmeriCorps, in a way, just gives us a bonus. It's kind of how I see it. We get to count a portion of that time. And the limit is 20% of their AmeriCorps time can be counted as training hours. So if we're doing the math on 450, it's 90. So it's up to 90 hours that you might be able to count for training. And then our third category, we don't see this very often, but you should still be aware that it's allowable for your members to do some service project fundraising. And it's a very specific type of fundraising, right? We're not raising money for our general operating fund, but specifically for a service project. So maybe you do a build-a-bed project and the members are going out soliciting in-kind donations. They're writing a grant, who knows? But as long as you can tie it directly to that service project, it'd be allowable. We can count it as AmeriCorps hours. But again, it's very limited, no more than 10%. So that'd be up to 45 hours that they could do that. And so we put all these three activities together, and that's going to lead us to our education award. You're seeing here what we call our shared language. These are major concepts that we like to talk about in the world of AmeriCorps. So that one there is our symbol for the Education Award, and we talk about how it opens up doors of opportunity for our young people. So that's what we can count. There are some things that we cannot, and we call those prohibited activities. It's something specifically written into the regulations. So it comes from CNCS, and they really focus on this concept. So in turn, we have to do the same thing. Anytime we're doing a training, you're probably going to hear us talk about prohibited activities. So what are they? Activities explicitly prohibited that AmeriCorps members cannot do. Really want to encourage you to use this technique if you aren't already. And it's an idea that came from a program in the network in Madison, Wisconsin. They teach their young people every year this idea that on AmeriCorps time, I don't burp. Pretty memorable. The B stands for business, the U for unions, R for religion, P for political. So saying that on AmeriCorps time, I don't engage in activities that support these types of institutions. And I believe there are 13 specific prohibited activities listed now. That's too much to remember. So we have these four main buckets, and if we can all remember that on AmeriCorps time I don't burp, that does the job. I wanted to quickly highlight that there's some new ones this year, all falling within that P category. So it's now explicitly prohibited from members engaging in census activities, election, or polling activities. When do restrictions on prohibited activities apply? Is it A, during service hours that are funded by AmeriCorps? B, during work hours charged to the grant by personnel listed on the approved budget? Is it C, during hours served by community volunteers recruited and managed by AmeriCorps members? Is it A and B, or is it E, all of the above? It is all of the above. So I think it's obvious A and B, right? We're talking about funding, but it is C as well, because we can't be kind of using these community volunteers as an intermediary to get around these rules. So it does apply to all three of those groups. So when do these restrictions not apply? Just because you're an AmeriCorps member doesn't mean that you can't be engaged in these activities on your own time, because you can. We just ask that you're not representing AmeriCorps when you do that. You're not wearing the AmeriCorps logo. You're not identifying yourself that way. And it's certainly fine for that to be part of your youth build program. But again, we're making a very clear distinction between what is AmeriTime and youth build time. Where are the prohibited activities required to be posted or listed? Is it A, in the AmeriCorps application, B, the member service agreement, C, locations where the member serves, B and C only, or E, all of the above? So it's B and C only. And this is where it's required to be posted or listed. If you want it to be in the application, sure, great. Personally, I feel like it's a lot of information up front for someone, but it must be in the member service agreement. And it's in our template that we provide, so please don't delete it. Must be in there exactly as it's written. And then it also has to be posted wherever a member is going to serve. And so that means at your program location. You need to print it out and post it somewhere. I think this requirement is about a year old. And I think when CNCS trained us on this, they gave us an example just to say, you need to post it wherever the member serves within reason. They don't expect you to have 50 copies and a staple gun. And if your members are doing conservation work out in the woods, that you staple it to every tree where that member is going to be. That's not what this is. But within reason, trying to make it clear to the members and those that they're around that prohibited activities are something they're not going to do. So at least at your main building. And maybe if your members go somewhere else every day, you would post it there too. We're back to our youth build time and AmeriTime circles. And I'm about to move into a screen where I'm going to have a lot of different activities that are really typical to a youth build program. And I'm going to ask you to guide me in the chat on which circle should it go in. So is this a youth build time activity, meaning we don't count it for AmeriCorps, or is it an AmeriTime activity and we would count those hours? I've got two in here already to give you an example of what I meant. So we have most education time out here in our youth build time circle and some education in the AmeriTime circle, because as we learned, there was a limitation on how much training time we got to count. So that's why only some here. Let's start with advocacy. This is youth build time because that's one of our prohibited activities. This is that P within our BURP acronym. What about service training? I'm even going to kind of hang it over the line because, again, we've got a limitation on how much service training time we get to count, right? We have that 20% cap. But yes, absolutely, we'll count that as AmeriTime. Service project fundraising. Absolutely, we can feel confident that we count that as AmeriTime. Primary and secondary service. Again, we get to count all of that time as AmeriTime. Program fundraising, put it out in our youth build time. And then finally, case management. Now we have our completed chart. And I hope that this gives you an idea. These are the common things that are happening. And you give an idea of where they fit and where they don't fit. But again, to make sure that we're super clear on this, we're going to do one more activity.
All right, folks. So we just went over kind of an understanding of how it works. And now we're really going to test things we're going to do some trivia. So we're going to go off. We're going to start things. Here's our first scenario. Hope everybody's ready. Members are serving with Habitat for Humanity to construct low-income housing. So yes, this is going to be a service activity. They're serving with Habitat for Humanity. They're doing their primary service activity with their construction members in that construction of low-income housing, and it's with a nonprofit partner. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. Members are conducting a voter registration drive in a low-income community on MLK Day to raise awareness and encourage civic engagement. So unfortunately, even though this is an activity that you're kind of helping out with the community, the voter registration drive, even a nonpartisan one, is considered inherently a political activity, and it would be prohibited. So this is something you can do on your youth build time, wearing your youth build shirts, just not while you're wearing the A or counting towards AmeriCorps hours. Members are serving at a church food kitchen, which is open and available to the public. It actually would be service. So this is something you could count towards AmeriCorps service. So why is this allowable? We've got that word church in there. That seems like it might be a problem when religion is an issue with our prohibited activities. It is allowable because of the open and available to the public piece. Because it is not exclusive to that congregation or for the exclusive benefit of this church, but is instead meeting an unmet community need, that's why we can include it. And I'm from South Carolina and I'm living in South Carolina. So there is a lot of community outreach by churches. So we're not saying that you can't partner with or work with religious institutions at all. What we're saying is you need to be focused on what is the unmet community need, and who is going to benefit from this, right? So moving right along, members are volunteering at the program's annual fundraiser to raise general funds for the organization. So it's no for this one. So again, there are allowable types of fundraising, but the key phrase here is we're talking about general funds for the organization. So it's not specific to service projects, which is why this type of fundraising is not allowable. And you get Grumpy Cat telling you no, rest in peace, Grumpy Cat. All right, so the next one. Members are in the math class learning about algebra. So you would be able to count this for training. Again, with the caveat that as long as you're not over that 20% cap for your members. And I'd also like to point out that this is actually a special rule for programs like us, like Youth Build, that work with members who are working towards their GED or high school diploma. The reason that we can count hours in a math classroom that may not be necessarily related to their service per se is because of the fact that we are working with them towards their GED high school diploma. And that is something that AmeriCorps cares about. And so they have allowed us to count those hours as training. So you can count those hours as training as long as you're not over the cap. All right, moving on to the next one. Members are in a meeting planning for their 9/11 service project. So this counts for service. So this is an important point, and that planning for service counts as service. So even though they're sitting in a meeting and they're not directly in the community, they're still working on that service project. That service project is going to be a direct benefit to the community. That's why we're going to make those hours allowable. So, just keep in mind that if you have a project, don't just think about the time that they're actually physically doing the project. What's going into that project? Can you count those hours towards AmeriCorps hours? And a lot of the times the answer is probably yes. Now, if you run across something and you're not sure, you're like, oh, well, we've got this project coming up. We don't know what hours we can count or what we can't. Reach out to us, talk to your portfolio manager, and we're happy to walk it through with you. So the next one, members are serving at a church building new pew benches for parishioners. Earlier, I was like, churches are okay. Oh, but now we circle back to when churches aren't okay. So again, when you're working with a religious institution, there is a fine line. In this case, the line that we have, and the reason the answer is a no, is because this is directly helping out the church specifically, right? Like these pew benches are meant for people attending the church for religious services, right? And that's really where you have that line, is if it's going to be related to those religious services, then the members shouldn't be earning hours for it. Now, if you have a partnership with a religious institution in your community and they're asking you to do this as a favor and you feel it's appropriate for your Youth Build program, that's okay. You can do that. It just shouldn't be on AmeriCorps time or earning AmeriCorps hours. All right, so next one. Members are holding a bake sale to raise money for a Veterans Day project. So it would actually count towards the service project fundraising. So you could count it as AmeriCorps hours, but it needs to be in this fundraising category because they are specifically raising money. And so when you go to the hour log, which we'll talk about a little bit, and you guys will have some homework around, there is a section for fundraising. So you want to make sure that you're correctly marking those hours. Now, a lot of people, they don't want to deal with it, so they just don't record fundraising hours and they don't track it. That's totally understandable. But if you are going to count something like this, you do need to make sure it's correctly on the hour log under those fundraising hours. Members are participating in an urban gardening project sponsored by Starbucks. So we're going to count this under service. So again, we have this corporate element to it, but the benefit is going to the community. So now, for example, if they were like planting coffee beans that Starbucks was going to use to make money off of, that wouldn't be okay because that's providing a direct benefit to the business. But in this case, we're talking about meeting an unmet community need and helping out with the garden. You have the corporation, the business involved, but the benefit is going to the community. So again, we don't want to cut you off from avenues of having partners to do these projects. We just want to make sure that ultimately what the project about is meeting that unmet community need. Members are in a construction lab building benches for a community park as a learning project. So the answer for this one is service. So it's happening in a construction lab and it's a learning project, but so why is it service? So it's counting for service because you're going to finish something that's going to benefit and end up in the community. Now, it may not be the first bench you work on. It may not be the second bench you work on. It may not be the 15th bench you work on. But eventually, you're going to get a bench, and that bench is going to end up in a community park as part of meeting that unmet community need. So even though it's a learning project, and you might go through several iterations of it, it's still benefiting the community, and so we're going to count it as service. And as Matt Clerico just put into the chat, this is particularly important in a pandemic, right? Like you may not be able to interact with service participants in the same way that you have been in the past. So maybe you have to do some projects back at the home building and then bring them into the community. So the key is that ultimately the community benefits. So here's a topical one for everybody. Members are handing out water at a police reform protest. This would fall under the no category. Obviously, we want young people to be involved in their community, engage in civic engagement, but this just isn't something that's appropriate while they're wearing the A or serving on AmeriCorps time. And we do, fall on the somewhat conservative side of things around some of these political issues because we do care about kind of how things look, right? So if somebody takes a picture of a lot of people in the crowd and associates Youth Build and AmeriCorps with these protests, we do get a lot of money for federal funders. And so this is something that they've, not this specifically, but political activities in general, asking us not to engage in. But everybody seemed to be on the same page around that one. Okay, next one. So members are in the classroom writing a reflection on their 9/11 service project. Our earlier example of planning, we are going to count this as part of the service, reflecting on that service project, being a step in service learning as they reflect on their experience in the program counts towards their service. So just because they're in the classroom doesn't mean they can't be earning service hours. And this could also apply, again, if you're doing some remote activities with young people. Next week, Matt and LT are going to talk through some great options for young people to reflect during their service experience. And you can find ways, so long as you're tying that reflection back to their service in the community and that service project, then you can count those hours. So members are making masks at home to donate to a children's hospital. Yes, we're going to count this under service. One important point about this is we are going to count it, but we do want you to have a teleservice policy about that. So this is a plug for next week. We're going to talk more in depth about service activities in the time of COVID, and we're going to go through some of the requirements. And one of those things is making sure you have a teleservice policy. So put a pin in it for now. We're not going to go through it right now. But in the back of your mind, if you're doing these kinds of at-home activities, just know that you need that teleservice policy, and we'll give you more details next week. A reminder that we have this information available. So Lauren Vermouth put together our timekeeping guidance that has these things broken down and kind of gives you examples of different things and which bucket they could go on. So that's available on our website. Again, we're linking you to a lot of things as a part of these projects. You'll get those throughout the conference. And one of these things will be our timekeeping guidance. So if you're confused about this, read over this, take a look. It really does a good job of kind of walking you through what is allowable and what's not. And also importantly, there's a lot of gray area in some of these activities. You know, I think people are putting in the chat. I don't think anybody has said that they got 100% right, right? So these are tough questions, and there can be gray area. So if you're not sure about how to count something, reach out to us, ask us. I get these questions all the time, and a lot of it is, you know, you're not sure, you ask me, and then I send you an email saying it's okay. Now if something goes wrong, it's my fault, right? Like, you did your job, you reached out to your portfolio manager, you asked them what was the correct way to go, and if I give you the wrong information, then you can point back to the email and be like, well, David said that we should do it. So, you know, if you're uncertain about anything, you know, take that minute to shoot us an email or give us a call, so we can talk through it to make sure we're on the same page.